here's a few other things to sort of be aware of with Lightning Web Components. The syntax is going to be different than what you're used to in Aura. So here's a few other things to sort of be aware of with Lightning Web Components. The syntax is going to be different than what you're used to in Aura. So
syntax both markup and JavaScript?
Yes. So let me show you we'll go back to our hello example here. And you'll notice that, for example, lightning card is lightning dash card. And in Aura, that would have been lightning full colon card.
Right, the colons seem to have gone away.
Yep. And the same thing with attributes is going to be icon dash name instead of icon name camel case. So the way that we name our components and the way that we name the attributes on the components is different in Lightning Web Components. It's a kebab style case.
Can you explain kebab style?
So kebab style is, instead of camel case or underscores, we're using hyphens between the words in the
sort of like what we do with block element modifier in Lightning design system. It's similar.
And this is done because this is the HTML convention.
Right.
So part of the definition of a custom element in HTML is it requires it to have a hyphen. And if it's going to have multiple hyphens, that's okay, but it's sort of an expectation.
It's a web standard, new web standards, right?
New web standards. So LWC tries to fit into that shape as best it can. And then with our markup here, it looks quite a bit different, right? We've got an import statement, we've got this export default class thing going on, quite different than what we're used to with an Aura controller.
So is that import pattern the same as non-Salesforce in the modern JavaScript web standard model?
It is. So what's actually in the JavaScript file here is an ES module, which is a modern JavaScript concept that's actually been standardized and adopted by all major browsers. So this syntax here will look very comfortable and familiar to your typical modern JavaScript developer. Now, maybe as a Salesforce developer, you haven't seen this before, it's new to you, but it's pretty standard. It's quite standard, actually. So the import allows us to pull in information from other modules like functions and properties and access to them. And then the export is what our module is going to give to the world.
If we want it to?
If we want it to.
So it's a way of sort of closing it down. If we don't want it to, we don't put the export statement.
So we're always going to have an export of some kind because we need a module.
You can't see it. It's like
but we can pick and choose what parts of our module will be visible.
We can control scope.
So we can control our surface area, our public API to other modules. We can define which functions and which properties are available.
Sort of what we did in Aura with private and public attributes. And if you wanted to expose a function in the controller, you could create a method in markup. Same idea?
Very similar, and we'll get into exposing methods later. But right now, let's mention another decorator while we're at it. So similar to track, there's another decorator called API. And what this does is it says, hey, this property should be surfaced as part of what other components can see and manipulate about my component.
So this is like a public attribute?
This is a public attribute. So API and track both make a property reactive. That's the word that Salesforce uses for these properties. They're reactive properties, which means that they are tracked. I won't use track again. They are monitored to possibly re-render.
Because that's what indicates that something needs to be re-rendered, the changing of this value in this variable or this property. We're going to call them properties.
So I have API as a public property, track is a private property, but it influences rendering, and not having either decorator is essentially a private property that does not influence rendering.
Got it. So if these decorators are on a property, we know that this property could or should or something to do with rendering. But if we want a property that doesn't have these decorators on it, it's not going to be affecting rendering. It can't affect rendering.
Correct.
Okay.
And one more thing worth mentioning, when we pull in the decorator like this, we also have to say that we're going to use it. We have to import it from somewhere. So my import here, I'm going to go back and include API in my import because I intend to use that decorator in my code. That's a very common pattern we'll see a lot. Things that I want to use, I have to pull them in before I can use them.